Dan is not a stranger. Some of you may never have met Bonnie before, his wonderful wife, and it's great to have him. It's great. Dr. Dan is a mentor, a friend, and it's neat that our families have been able to work together shoulder to shoulder in ministry before, and good times and good memories, and we're going to hear about what God has put on Dan's heart today.
Thank you, Pastor Mike, and grateful to see all of you and to see new faces that I haven't seen before. Trying to think when the last time I was here. Was it in the summer, maybe? I think it might have been. And there was my phone beeping already, wasn't it? I forgot to turn it on. And I'm also very grateful that you all sat back that far so that I don't get the coronavirus. So thank you for thinking of me in that regard. And I was at a church in North Carolina, Bonnie and I were last week, and the people, oh man, I messed up. In the Sunday night service, they all sat in the back. They're redoing their sanctuary, and so they all sat in the back. And it was bizarre, because they were in the last row, and it was a Baptist church. Back row Baptist church, no question about it. I'm sorry I've already messed up here, and I need to redo something. You're supposed to go back to the first one. Introduce ourselves just very briefly. There we go. Okay. After pastoring for 25 years and then directing Piper Bible Conference for 7 years, we've been involved with overseeing 2 ministries as a director. 800 Follow Me is an evangelism ministry. All my ministries have websites, of course. And the Nathaniel Project, which is a 2-month evangelism program for a church, is under that 800 Follow Me. And then Joy in Jesus Ministries is more of a mentoring ministry. That's where we work with guys like your pastor and wives, and try to encourage them, work with them. I also get to go over to India, and I do quite a bit of mentoring over there and teaching over there. And normally when I go, I spend about a month, and was over there in the month of December, the end of the month of December into January. And so I just thought I would share a little bit about what all I did while I was there, some stats from India. So here they are. How many airports was I in? I was in 6, and there's the list. Now, what's interesting is over in India, they have these luggage carts. We have them in America too. If you go to JFK, you go there, you pay $5 to rent one of those things. In India, they are free. Everybody has them there at the airport. And the only reason why I like to go to India is for the free luggage carts. Okay, there's other reasons, but that's it. How many airplanes I was in? 8. As I traveled. Some of the airplanes, you still have to go up the steps, and some of you remember that from years back. Many of the airports are more modern than our airports. They are beautiful. And inside, it's like a mall. And in fact, one in Delhi, they have a furniture store, and I'm still trying to figure out, how do you bring that onto an airplane? But it's really a great place. And miles that I flew, approximately just under 18,000. And so it's quite a bit over there and back and then through the country. And then how many times did I have to wait for my luggage to come out and be the last guy? Turned out to be 2. In fact, you can see the lady that might be hard to see that, but she's sweeping up, she's cleaning up. I'm still there waiting for my luggage, and then it came out. I was very grateful for that. Not sure what I would do without it. How many vehicles did I ride in? 15, but I did not ever ride in a rickshaw, and certainly could not have gotten into that one because it looks pretty full. How many guys are on the top of this truck? Now, they don't have a whole lot of overpasses over there, so they take the trucks and they load them up as high as they can go. Sometimes they tip over, but there were three. There's three guys up there, I believe. And then as far as preaching, we get to preach in various churches, and had the opportunity to preach in village churches, as well as city churches. And this last church is called Fusion Church. It's in Hyderabad, in what's called Tech City. You know, when you have a problem with an appliance or your phone or computer, you call somebody and they sound like they're from India, they go to this church. And I yell at them every time I go over there for you. Actually, these are great people. And they do 2 services each Sunday morning in English, which is really fun. They're very educated, highly educated people, especially. The village churches are different. They're not as educated. So it's always a joy to be able to speak to these folks. And that's just half of the audience. They took down a wall and they have another side there with a whole bunch more people that were sitting in. So delight to be with them. And then as far as conference speaking, we held 4 different conferences. I got to speak 24 times. And one of the conferences that we do every year is in Hyderabad. That's a huge city, south central part of India. And then this was down in the most southern point of India. And it was really a neat building. The building was built in 1917, I believe. And so, you know, a typical lecture hall, you've got the drop ceiling, you've got the tile on the floor, you know, I mean, that's just the regular way it is. Well, this was iconic. I kind of felt like I was a Greek philosopher speaking with columns, and it was just really, really kind of cool. And so that was my first time with them. I hope to be back with them. And then the number of translators that I had, 10, and these guys just amazed me. To be able to take what I say and to interpret it into their language. This fellow here, I was preaching at a dedication of a church, and he was just a fireball. He made me sound really good. They had this picture behind me. Poor people had to look at me and look at the picture. I felt bad for them. This guy is the founder of the school that I was teaching at, and he actually has translated for Billy Graham. And so I told him, I said, okay, you got Billy Graham, and now you got Dan Allen. So you got, yeah, well, he's got a certificate for Billy. I didn't bring one over to him. But I did have a little bit of a scare with him in that I like to tell stories, and oftentimes they're funny and humorous. I hope they are. And he laughed really, really well, really hard, actually. In fact, one point, all of a sudden he stopped laughing. And he took a couple steps back and he sat down. And then a couple guys in the front came over and they took him off the stage and walked him out. And I thought, I think I've just killed this guy. You know, he's having a heart attack or something. And you remember that song from back in the 60s or 70s, Killing Him Softly with My Love, Killing Him Softly with My Jokes. That's what I thought. And so we paused for a word of prayer. And actually the punchline of the story came after that. His son came up and helped out. He was fine. But he had a pain on the side of his stomach, and I think it was from laughing. So almost my first casualty from laughter. So at any rate. Meals with ministry leaders, we always get to spend time with them. And again, we're mentoring and encouraging them as they have an opportunity to sit down and have lunch, breakfast, dinner with me, and with my colleagues, those that are with me as well. In fact, this was later that night from this guy in the laughing episode, and he was fine, he ate fine, everything's fine. Churches that I got to dedicate, one. We're into dedicating churches, we're into helping build churches. It costs $10,000 to build a church in India, and they have to buy the property, and then we supply the money for them, and then they do the building. And they did a beautiful job in this church. This is probably one of the best that I've seen. Right now they're building one. I've got money to send over for another one, and we're starting to collect money to build one in Nepal. I don't have any pictures of that, I should. This is where they were meeting, which was one of the rooms of the pastor's house. So juxtapose that to what I showed you with the other pictures, and you can see that they now have a really nice meeting place. And how many chickens came to the dedication service? They always just kind of fly in there, and it turns out 2. We had 2 chickens. I took that picture. with the feet up there, and or the 1 foot, so there you go. So thanks for those who prayed for us and really appreciate it. Lord willing, we'll be going back again in January next year and spending about a month to minister with the folk. That was our 13th trip, I think. Is that right? 13th trip, yeah. I've never been much of a runner. In fact, if you ever see me running, stop to help because something or someone is chasing me. You know why runners jog early in the morning? They do so, they must finish before their brains figure out what they're doing. All right, that's why it's early in the morning. And the Bible verse that keeps me from running, from Proverbs 28:1, the wicked run when no one is chasing them. But I think I found a marathon that I might be interested in doing, maybe. You know, there's some pretty serious races out there. You've got races up steep mountains. You've got a race that goes all the way across the country. There's the double Ironman distance race, which involves a 4.8-mile swim and then a 224-mile bike ride followed by a 52-mile run. And then there's one race that's held in Queens, New York. And it's 3,100 miles. You say, how in the world can you do that in Queens? Well, you go around one block 5,649 times, and you have 52 days to complete it. None of those races are the ones that I'm considering doing. If I decide to do a race, it's a 4-mile one down in Raleigh, North Carolina. You run 2 miles, and then you have to eat a dozen donuts from Krispy Kreme. After which you complete the race. It's called the Krispy Kreme Challenge. I think this would be certainly an interesting race. I'm not sure that I could do the two ahead of time at any rate. We all know about races, and so did the people in the New Testament when it was being written. In fact, the Apostle Paul used it various times as a metaphor, as a figure of speech to drive home his point. He used such phrases as run in a race from 1 Corinthians 9:24 and running well from Galatians 5:7, and so that we don't run in vain in Philippians 2:16. Well, we have a race metaphor in the passage I'd like to look at today, and it's from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Now, in your bulletin or some sermon notes, I always like to have those. There's also some information of our ministry on the back side and an article on the inside if you get bored. And if you fill out the entire sermon notes and give them to your pastor, he will give you a brand new car. A brand new car. In fact, they're all parked right down here at Price. Yeah, okay. Well, Hebrews chapter 12, it talks about this race. And if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're in this race. Whether you like it or not, you're in the race. It starts from when you accept Christ, when you become a follower of Jesus, until you go home to be with Jesus. All right? It is a race that we are in. And it's a race that we need to run well. And so I'd like to look at this race and see how it's possible to run, even in tough times. Times are a little tough right now. They're interesting. This is unprecedented. Some of the stuff, in fact, where I was to speak this week got canceled because a lot of churches did. Anybody over 250, 250 people, according to our governor, should reconsider meeting, and so this church did. Just very gracious for your pastor to allow me to speak, and I thank him for that. So in troubled times, how should we run this race? And the writer of Hebrews tells us, and so here it is, and I'm quoting this somewhat from the English Standard Version, somewhat from the King James. So you can follow along with me in your Bibles. But therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostilities against himself, so that you do not grow weary or faint-hearted. So this is the race that's mentioned, and I want us to look at the purpose of the race, the process of the race, procedure to survive the race, and then we'll give some examples at the end as to how to get through in tough times. So the purpose of the race, I've already mentioned that this is a race of the Christian life, but there is a purpose here. The purpose of the race is not to get to heaven. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're going to heaven, guaranteed. All right, this race is not to get to heaven. This race is the process of which you're living the Christian life. Work out your salvation. It says in Scripture, that's what we're doing. We're working our salvation. And so drop down to verse 4, and verse 4 through 10, it gives us an idea as to what the purpose is. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure, all right? Discipline for that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you're illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. There it is, that we may share in his holiness. We are running this race, and there are obstacles in the race. And these obstacles are there to help us so that we will become more holy, so that we will become greater followers of Jesus Christ. That's the purpose of this race. It's a testing of our obedience and endurance. Think of the children of Israel. They come into the promised land, and they're supposed to eradicate everybody that's there. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites. Okay, they weren't one of them, but the Peruzarites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, they didn't do the job. And then God says to them in Judges 3:2 that he left them there in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. This was to test their endurance. It was to teach them war. So we have these same obstacles that are in front of us. Obstacles that will test us and discipline us, which will lead to holiness. So the purpose of the race is that we may share in his holiness. Okay, what's the process then? The process of the race. Well, first of all, we're supposed to endure. Endurance is a steady determination to keep going. It means continuing even when everything in you wants to shut down or to give up. The race in which we're involved is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a day after day until we get to glory type of thing. So we need to pace ourselves and run with endurance. Unfortunately, too many Christians, there's a lack of desire to succeed and will. They are content simply to be saved and wait to go to heaven. They may look like Christians. They may somewhat act like Christians. Someone has said they're a luxury car without an engine. And I question if they're true followers of Jesus Christ. One of the fears that I had as I pastored, and I did so for 25 years, is that there were people in my congregation who really looked the part, but I don't think they were followers of Christ. And I have some family as well, some relatives, that I don't think they're followers of Jesus either. I think they are, but I don't think they are. And you know, Jesus said to some people, they said, but Lord, we did this in your name, and this in your name, and this in your name. And Jesus said, what? I never knew you. And so that had me in fear, and so I've written something that I just published within the last month called Are You Sure? A little tract to cause people to think through this. In fact, we're supposed to use that passage from 2 Corinthians 13:5. Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourself. I have a copy of this for each one of you. My beautiful trophy wife here of almost 43 years will give you a copy on the way out if you'd like one. How do we endure? Well, we build up that endurance over the long haul. What does a distance runner do? I'm not one, so I have to ask, and I learned that they don't start running 26.2 miles the first day. They may start with 0.2 miles and then lead up to 2 miles and beyond. In fact, one runner told me, he said, you never really run the 26.2 miles until you're actually in a marathon. I didn't know that. I figured they probably did. Well, training is the key for runners. So it is with us. Our training is being involved in daily spiritual disciplines of reading our Bible, memorizing scripture, meditating upon it, is praying on a daily basis, more than just at mealtime. It's worshiping together more than just once or twice a month. Our training involves being active, using our spiritual gifts and serving God. These things and more build endurance. So in this process, we are to endure. Secondly, we are not to become weary and faint-hearted. We know what it's like to become weary. It's more than just being tired, which a good nap or a good night's sleep will cure. Weariness is of the heart. It's of the mind. It's of the spirit, the soul. We've given so much out that we just need a break. Think soldiers who have been fighting long and hard, and it's produced weary and depressed soldiers. To be faint-hearted means we're now timid, no longer as sharp or prepared as we should be. The command to be ready to make a defense in season and out of season, well, it's definitely out of season, and we're not ready. It's because we're faint-hearted. Does this happen today? Well, sure it does. It happens. Sometimes it can be tragic. Jared Wilson, an associate pastor at a megachurch in California, who is the founder of a mental health advocacy group, took to Twitter and he wrote, quote, "Loving Jesus doesn't always cure suicidal thoughts, depression, PTSD. Loving Jesus doesn't always cure anxiety. But that doesn't mean Jesus doesn't offer us companionship and comfort. He always, all caps, he always does that." Well, that night, Wilson, 30, killed himself. He had a wife and 2 children. I mentioned this to our counselor's son, who I figured would chalk it up to mental illness, and he was quick to say, no, Dad, that sounds like spiritual warfare. That sounds like somebody who is weary and faint-hearted, to the extreme. So it does happen, but that's a rare demonstration of being weary and faint-hearted. One commentator wrote, for the most part, weary Christians are not going to do anything dramatic. They're not planning to join a coven of witches or write a tract on the satisfaction of atheism or establish a new and less demanding religion. They're not going to go away mad. They're just going to go away. And the writer of Hebrews is concerned about those who slip quietly out the side door, never to return. As pastors and Christian leaders, we've seen this. People who have been active in the church, and then for some reason, they become weary, and they stop being active, and then they just kind of slide out the door. How can we prevent that? How can we prevent ourselves from becoming weary and faint-hearted and have that endurance? Well, let's look at the race itself. Looking inward, I want to start with, and the scripture here says, lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely. He's not speaking about physical weight, although that's not a bad idea, but joggers might carry weights when they run to build up extra muscle. Sometimes you see them holding them in their hands, or maybe they have them on their wrist. But you don't ever see them carrying books or carrying lumber or carrying a washing machine. No, they want to be as sleek as they can with skinny clothing so that they do not have extra weight holding them. Former pastor at Berea Bible Fellowship Church in Stroudsburg, David Duggins, a friend of ours, is a runner. And when he was working as an editor for Moody Press in Chicago, he would do their annual marathon. And he noted that often the Windy City, as we know it's called, would be cold when they started out. And so the runners were bundled up. But as folks ran, they would start discarding the extra clothes that they had on. Mittens, hats, scarves, sweatshirts would all be seen alongside the road. It was extra weight, which was going to hold them back, so they needed to get rid of it. Incidentally, at the New York Marathon, it takes at least 200 volunteers all day to collect the disposable clothing and 23 trucks to haul it away. Fortunately, it all goes to Goodwill. What type of weight might he be speaking about? Well, he doesn't say. But we can make some inferences. For instance, he's writing to a predominantly Christian Jewish audience. And a weight that they would have been the Jewish rituals that they grew up with. These things would would have been part of their life. They may have held on to these things. We see that in the book of Acts, where there's some questions concerning some of what they felt Christians should do. And there was a council, the First Church Council, saying, wait a second, they don't need to do all this stuff. We could do this stuff. Why should we burden it with them? Well, so you have that as a backdrop of these individuals. And so that might be something that would hurt them. And the rituals and traditions might impede their race. Many Christians in India have been converted out of Hinduism. And they seem to have Hindu festivals all the time. At least whenever I'm over there. I actually went online to find out last night, and I learned that there's basically 10 of them, major ones, 3 that are super major, and it just so happens I happen to be there the time of the year when they're going through one of these. But these folks who have been converted out of that religion still have to see those festivals taking place, most of which are celebrating a god. They have one festival that I noted when I was over in August going into September last year, and they buy this elephant-looking god, and then they keep it in their house or somewhere prominent for 10 days, where I guess they worship it somehow, and then they take the god and they drown it in a lake or in a river, so that its spirit will go back to the mountain. I don't know, that's just what they do. So you've got these Christians now who are bound to some of these traditions and some of these rituals. That could be holding them back. And I think that's what he's talking about, things holding them back. Then again, what could be impeding our race, holding us back, are things that are good, but that divert our attention away from what is most important. Family, very important. But it can be a weight if it comes before our love and service to God. Jobs, gotta have them, gotta pay the bills. But when they zap our energy or dampen our enthusiasm for the things of God, maybe it becomes a weight. How about sports? Sports are great for kids. I'm suffering right now because March Madness isn't on. Baseball isn't on. I didn't even turn the TV on yesterday, which was really a shock probably to everybody in the household, which is only one other person. But sports for kids is terrific. However, sometimes they can pull us away from church and become more important than church. Someone wrote an article some time ago, not that long ago, entitled, "When Ball Becomes Bail, Is Your Kid's Sports Involvement a Family Idol?" When I presented this message in North Carolina, the pastor afterwards thanked me for mentioning that, because that's a problem in their church, apparently so. Or, one commentator noted, it might be other Christians that weigh us down. Often the workers in the church have to keep jumping over or running around non-workers. So as we look inward, not only should we lay aside every weight, but he also says the sin which clings so closely. Again, not specific. If he's still thinking about the last chapter, chapter 11, the faith chapter, perhaps he's referring to the opposite of faith. That's unbelief. There's nothing which will hold you back as unbelief will. Unbelief exposes us to all sorts of temptation. It gives advantage to all disheartening, weakening, discouraging considerations to in effect depart from God. Is God able to help us through this crisis of this virus? Well, you bet he is. And yet, I don't know. See, and that can hold us back. That can discourage us. But it also could be sins that are particular to us, that cling to us. You know what those sins are. Those things could be holding you back from the race that God has you in. Think of a runner going to the race wearing a bathrobe. Only he doesn't take it off when he gets at the line. He's going to now try to run with that, and you can see how that entangles in his legs. He can't run very well. We need to get rid of these things. So look inward and make sure you're spiritually sufficient to run. Secondly, look around. Notice the witnesses. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Taken at face value, without any context, we might consider the witnesses to be those around us, or perhaps those who have gone on before us and are now in heaven. Have you ever wondered if your friends who are in heaven can see you now? I did some crowdsourcing with my friends on Facebook to see what they thought, And a majority said no, they're too busy worshiping God or enthralled with his glory. Several answered in the affirmative, with one suggesting they're cheering us on. One gal commented, quote, I think God can certainly give them happy glimpses if he wills it. Mostly, I think we overemphasize the importance of things going on here on earth to those with Jesus once they get to heaven. John Piper kind of feels that they can, despite the fact that nowhere in Scripture says it says they can. If they can, he says, he was sure that they see it not with their old imperfect eyes, and not understand it with their old imperfect minds, and not access it with their old imperfect hearts. Rather, they have been perfected in heaven. But this verse is not a proof text for them being able to see it, not at all. In fact, since the verse starts out with therefore, or wherefore, if you're using the King James Version, we have to assume this is a follow-up from chapter 11. And we all know what that is. That's a Hall of Faith chapter. Some of the great leaders of faith who went through all sorts of challenges, yet did not waver in their faith are mentioned. Abel, Enoch, Abraham and Sarah, Moses, Gideon, Samson, David, Samuel, to mention a few. They all were in the race. They all finished the race with excellence. And then in verse 33, in fact, if you have your Bibles, drop down there to verse 33, and he now opens this up, not to just these people, but to others as well who did the race, who, through faith, conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of the fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by the resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. All of these, he says, are commended for their faith. They all succeeded. They all finished the course. This is this cloud, or I'm probably going to say crowd, of witnesses because they're too close. And so when I get excited here in a few minutes talking about this, it'll either be cloud or crowd of witnesses. But these who are mentioned in the chapter are listed there, and now those unnamed are listed there. And since when this was written back in the first century, and we now have 19 centuries since then, you can imagine the millions that are up there who completed the race, went through difficult times, survived. They are the cloud of witnesses that are there. Some of you might remember listening to J. Vernon McGee on the radio, and to this he said, I personally couldn't think of anything more boring for them to watch us run the Christian race down here, especially the way some of us are running it. Are these people watching us in this race? John MacArthur said to have a whole gallery of such great people looking down on us would not motivate us, but paralyze us. You know how some of you feel if you were asked by your pastor to come up here and speak or pray or talk. It would paralyze you. Well, could you imagine having these people watching you? That's not what they're doing, I don't believe. And let me illustrate this by telling you that when I go to India, I oftentimes will stop at a pearl shop in Hyderabad. The city of Hyderabad, where I often minister, is noted as the pearl capital of the world. Despite being 700 miles from the nearest ocean, they have craftsmen who are able to string the fresh and saltwater pearls, and they've been doing it for a century. I Googled the top pearl shops in Hyderabad, figuring I get 10. There were 100. They are all over the place. And there's a photo on the wall that I didn't want to see of this guy because he's the last owner. He became a friend, and he passed away just about almost 2 years ago now. But there are other photos that are on top of the wall as well. These are previous owners. This particular pearl shop has been owned by one family since 1936. And it's gone from one generation to the next generation, 4 or 5 generations now of these people. And these guys